These are lovely. These are for sale, and there's a silent auction going on. This is a painting of James Madison, and we have the information on the original artist who did this. This is an autographed portrait photograph of President Trump, and it is his authentic signature on there. This is a Trump Challenge coin. Very cool. Trump Challenge coin. And then this, which I think is just so extraordinary. This is by Art Spa Vegas. It's the, where is the letter? So this is Charles Roger Allison's painting. He's the head of Art Spa Las Vegas, and it's absolutely extraordinary painting of George Washington in his general gear, and his this is actually the coat that George Washington wore. This is exactly what George Washington wore when he was commanding the Revolutionary War, during the Revolutionary War, Commander-in-Chief of the rebel. Now, let me just say, so a little bit about myself. I'm a constitutional attorney, have been for the last 38 years. I hold the record for defeating the Food and Drug Administration in federal court on First Amendment grounds. I did that 8 times. In addition, I've defeated other agencies of the government. In short, what I've been doing since I came to Washington in the Reagan administration, I worked as a 23-year-old lawyer in the Federal Communications Commission during the era of deregulation of radio and TV. And what I've been doing since that time is really fighting for your rights against the government. And that has been my passion. And fortunately for me, I've not only fought against the government, but I've defeated it and have a record, the record for defeating the government in federal court. So in this race, what we need really is someone who not only understands from an academic standpoint what the bureaucracy is, but understands it from actually working against it and understanding its weaknesses and how to exploit it and how to reduce it. Because 3/4 of all federal law now is made by the unelected heads of over 250 different agencies, bureaus, and departments. We no longer have a functioning constitutional republic. We have a bureaucratic oligarchy ruling our country, from everything from the open borders to the whole thing with the climate change agenda. All of this Biden has put through the administrative state, not going to Congress, and he has violated the law in doing so. The Constitution requires all law to be passed into law by Congress, and yet he has the administrative state making the most outrageous laws, including this new Department of Education regulation, reinterpreting Title IX so that they will now allow biological males in every woman and girl's bathroom, locker room, and sports team in the United States based on their reinterpretation of Title IX. Title IX was never meant to deal with gender identity. It was meant to deal with differences in sex, and it was meant to protect women, and now it's being used to harm them. And so we have got to reverse that, but that's among many things. Let's talk about what we need to do. So these things I know from the vantage point of somebody who's actually written legislation. I wrote the precursor to the Right to Try Act. I wrote the Access to Medical Treatment Act 20 years before, and Ron Paul, who's endorsed my candidacy, introduced that bill over and over again, and that bill would allow you to have access to an experimental drug if you're terminally ill without having to go beg the FDA. And so that bill was introduced by Ron Paul again and again and again and again, and it was never passed into law. And the reason was the drug industry lobbied against it. And no president of the United States would support it. Not George Bush Sr., not George Bush Jr., not Bill Clinton, and not Barack Obama. But after Ron Paul retired from Congress, he gave the bill to his son Rand Paul. And Rand Paul introduced it as the Right to Try Act. And he introduced it to President Trump. And of all those presidents, it was Trump who didn't have any, he wasn't beholden to the drug industry or anybody else. And he supported it. He put it in his State of the Union address. He pushed for it, and it passed into law, and he signed it into law. And so now you don't have to beg the FDA to get access to an experimental drug. So in addition to that, I've testified before Congress. I testified on that very bill before Congress. I've represented parties testifying before Congress. And I have really a wealth of experience that is critically important, but a wealth of experience not from inside the government protecting the government, but from outside the government attacking the government. And that's what we need, because we have a bloated, out of control federal bureaucracy. Let's talk about the issues quickly and solutions to the problems, and let's be specific, because I'm not a politician and I don't know any better. I don't know that you're supposed to not address controversial issues with specific answers. I do that. I think as a voter, I want to know what someone's position is. So let's just do this quickly. All right, so the issues that are of most concern, of course, we've got, look, the J6ers, right? The J6ers. We've got people who are who are political prisoners in America today. And we have a large number of them. And this is the weaponization of justice, the two-tiered system of justice. They're going after them because of their beliefs. They're not going after them because they happen to be in the Capitol at a particular time. You know, people trespass on Capitol grounds all the time, and they get a slap on the wrist and they're sent on their way. They're not incarcerated indefinitely, and they're not put in solitary confinement, and they're not then given to justice to go after them with a vendetta to destroy their whole lives and take all of their money away. But that's what's happening with this thing. And we're talking about over 1,200 people who have been arrested. And we're talking about hundreds of people who are incarcerated. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to introduce legislation that will grant amnesty and immediate release to the J6ers, except, and there is an exception. There is an exception. The exception is, except in instances where there is direct evidence that an individual harmed police, committed assault or battery against police, or against National Guard, or destroyed property, actually destroyed it. Everybody else needs to be set free because they're political prisoners. We're not going to have that in this country. That's a third world country. That's not the United States of America. All right, that's the J6ers. Let's talk about the vaccine. All right, we have been victimized by the greatest hoax in American history. We were told that this was a vaccine. It's not. We were told that this thing would be safe and efficacious. It isn't. We were told that this thing would prevent you from getting COVID. It didn't. We were told that if you got this thing, you wouldn't transmit COVID. You did. We were told that this was the solution, and it's the problem now. And what we had was a person in I'm going to use an F word, and I really apologize in advance for it because it is the most offensive F word, and I'm sorry I have to use this word. Fauci. So Anthony Fauci is the greatest betrayer of the United States in our history. This man colluded with an enemy of the United States, the Communist Chinese, with Dr. Xi at the PLA-controlled Wuhan lab. Every one of these labs, these institutes of virology in China, are bioweapons labs. Every one of them is. They're all under the PLA, and their very purpose is to take information and science to develop biological weapons that would be used against the West. It's in their doctrine. It has been for decades. This is a method that they plan to use against us. And so when Fauci began the interaction with these people, he was fully cognizant of this, and he was turning over to them through Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina and Peter Zazik at EcoHealth at Harvard, the information necessary for gain-of-function research. And although he denies it now, he answered numerous questions about gain-of-function research before he was interrogated by Senator Rand Paul. And it was only at that instance where he denied it. And then he came up after the fact with this whole thing within CDC and within the NIAID to try to redefine the term. He is guilty of perjury, no question about it. But in addition to that, the bigger thing is the betrayal of the American people. He enabled the Chinese to come up with a bioweapon. that weapon, which they were having under development in Wuhan, was released by accident into the population there. They cut off the entire province, including Wuhan, from any movement in China. But they left open international flights because at that point they weaponized it, and then it became a bioweapon. And for the rest of the world, they virtually destroyed it because they took down free enterprise, they took down everything with this. With the complicity, the full complicity of the United States government. This must never happen again. What will we do? We'll introduce legislation to prohibit the imposition of any federal mandate for masking or for vaccination, and that includes childhood vaccinations. We are going to have a patient-centric system of medicine in this country where you talk to your doctor and you find out what's best for you, and the government's going to get out of the way. Now, that's not everything, because they kicked so many people out of hospitals who were doctors. They kicked out all these people from the military based on this. They kicked out teachers. A whole bunch of people lost their jobs. And this is the federal government's fault. So you know what? The federal government's going to pay for it. So what's the legislation? We're going to require the government to offer rehires through every entity that fired them. And we are going to reimburse them for the back pay that they are out, and we're going to give them the promotions that they would have had, and we are going to make them whole, because they shouldn't have to lose their homes and lose their livelihoods and absolutely have to go through a period of mass poverty in order to suffer the consequences of the fault of the federal government. The federal government's going to pay for this. Now, the border crisis, let's talk about that. I was in the border in October, and this is an absolute disaster. Do you know that every person who seeks asylum coming into this country, this is what they do for them? They sign up everyone for welfare. They sign up everyone for food stamps. They give them Medicaid. In addition to that, they give them cash. A family of 4, and I'm talking about family in a real weird family way, because most of these are not families, but a family of 4 is so identifying. I guess you can identify as a family too. So a family of 4 that identifies as a family is given up to $3,000 in cash. Talk about incentivizing illegal entry. It's not only that the border is open, they're incentivizing people coming in. And who's coming in? Well, we have an army of people who are all over the United States in the zone of 20 to 30 million illegal aliens who are working for sub-minimum wages because they can't lawfully be employed. So they're being paid under the table, and they're working in restaurants, and they're working in construction sites, and so on. And they're taking jobs from Americans, and they're also creating this mass illegal underground economy. And a lot of them can't make it in urban areas. So where do they turn? They're already in an illegal economy. They turn to sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and other criminal illicit activity. So this administration is directly responsible for the loss of Americans' lives, liberty, and property. And that is Joe Biden's legacy. That is his legacy. And it's not just Joe Biden, it's Tim Kaine. Why? Because Tim Kaine, and I'm telling you, Tim Kaine has been behind absolutely every one of these policies that are a disaster. He was behind the whole ignominious retreat from Afghanistan. He spoke not one word against the president. He was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He had full access to information and intelligence about what would happen. He knew that Americans would be left behind. He knew that the United States military was at risk. He knew that $16 billion of the most sophisticated military hardware would be left. He knew that biometric data was going to be left, and the Taliban would get it, and with the help of the Communist Chinese, they would identify every one of our allies there who were involved and who were still there, and then they would go out and assassinate them. He knew all this, and when you ask him about it, what did he say? Well, my office helped the individuals who went over there to help get Americans out. That's what my office did. Well, you know what, Tim? The Artful Dodger nonsense is not going to fly when I'm running against you. I'm going to pin you on. But in addition to that, the whole agenda that we have on the open borders, 100% behind. You know, Tim Kaine actually said Alejandro Mayorkas is doing a great job, and it shouldn't be any surprise to us because this is George Soros' agenda for America. This is a globalist agenda for America. And guess who gave a candidate in his first run for elective office in Virginia, $50,000. Tim Kaine ran for mayor of Richmond, and when he ran for mayor of Richmond, there's a man named George Soros who gave him $50,000, and he's been wedded to the Soros family ever since, and he will do nothing to alienate that relationship. So if we looked for an answer on the borders from Tim Kaine, you get none. He has never voted in favor of any legislation to fix the borders, and he has never even criticized or indicated any disagreement with the overall policy being used here. And as a result, he too is responsible for the death of Americans, for the taking of Americans' lives, liberty, and property, including in this state, where 5 individuals a day are dying from fentanyl overdose because of the massive amount of drugs coming across. When I was at the border and I saw all this stuff, I knew it was a planned destruction of the United States. This is not an accident. No. This is not someone overlooking something. This is what they're implementing for the very purpose, not just of causing a change in the electoral nature of the country in a Democrat's favor. They think that. But in addition to that, this is to destroy our country. This is to destroy the free enterprise system. This is to make us beg the government for help. This is to turn every American into a dependent. And if you don't think this is the road to communism, you have got to go back and study Friedrich Hayek. This is the road to serfdom. And we've got to understand that. And when it comes to the border situation, 3 things. We are going to finish the border wall construction. In addition, the legislation I'll introduce will require block grants to the border states willing to defend the border to hire police and National Guard sufficient to do that. And third, most importantly, it will amend the asylum laws so that no one can put 1 foot into this country and seek asylum. If you put 1 foot into this country and seek asylum, you'll be permanently banned from citizenship and subject to immediate deportation. But in addition, we are going to change the asylum laws so that the only way you can seek asylum lawfully is through the United States Embassy in your country of origin or an adjacent country. We're going to take all of those administrative law judges who are in this country in this ridiculous system where you go up to 4 years before you have a hearing and they don't even go to the hearings. We're going to end this. We're going to move them all to the embassies. The administrative process for reviewing and for doing these hearings is going to go to the embassies, and all those administrative law judges are as well. And we're not going to have any of this prosecution in the United States because no one's going to come into this country illegally anymore. And Donald Trump will make sure of that. And we've got an army of people here illegally. We have an army of people here illegally, and you know what? We are not going to have a 2-tiered system of justice. We are not going to reduce your rights and those of legal immigrants to cater to illegal immigrants. They are going to be deported. Now, this inflation that is ravaging our country, 2 causes. We've got a president of the United States who's a complete knucklehead, who's got this climate change agenda, and you have who? Tim Kaine, fully in support of it. What did Tim Kaine tell the people in Virginia? Oh, I'm going to protect domestic production of oil and also coal. I'm going to protect that. Did he do it? No. What did he tell the people of Virginia about guns? He told Annette Elliott, who's the head of Showmaster's Gun Show, he talked to her personally. He told her, okay, look, you know what? We're going to protect guns under the Second Amendment. That's what Tim Kaine said. And he's voted for every effort to take our guns away that the Congress has ever introduced. Complete turncoat. This man is a hypocrite, and we are going to prove that. We're going to establish it very plainly. He is going to be on the defensive. If he thinks he's going to keep me on the defensive by using the false claims that they always use, that you're a racist, you're a homophobe, well, you know what, Tim? You're a racist for this reason, my friend. You favor critical race theory. It was your wife who brought it to Virginia as Secretary of Education, and you have been backing it ever since. And that is racism, Tim. Tim, when you tell our kids that based on their race, they should be separately categorized and the children who have one color should be advanced ahead of children of another color, and you're fully behind that, Tim? You know what that is, Tim? That's racism. That's right. That violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to introduce legislation to fix that, and that legislation is going to require every institution that receives federal funds, schools, the military, to be audited. and we're going to determine whether or not they're engaged in this CRT racism. And if they are, those military departments are going to be defunded, and those schools are going to be defunded, and we're going to defund hospitals and everything else until that scourge of racism is eliminated in this country. And we're not going to have these people that do doublespeak like Tim Kaine, enabling racism to be so pervasive that all our kids are now worrying about whether or not they have white privilege, and kids of color are worrying about whether there's any opportunity for them in this inherently racist society that they live in. That's a bunch of bunk. We all know that. This is a land of opportunity. We will prosecute racism, and we will prosecute racism against Tim's friends for violating the fundamental equal protection of under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act. Now the inflation situation that I mentioned before, let me just say what I'm going to do about that. We have over $1 trillion being spent every year on this ridiculous climate change agenda. The climate change agenda is a gift to the communist Chinese. We're dumping hundreds of billions of dollars from the United States to China for making all of these solar panels. But if you were to follow their program, our energy needs are going up exponentially. If you just took where we are right now and you tried, and you would fail, but Biden is doing this, you tried to replace fossil fuels with solar panels and windmills, you would have to take 1/2 of the geographic, 1/2 of the space of the United States, half the states, and cover them with windmills and solar panels to generate enough electricity to equal what electricity needs are right now. In another 2-3 years, you wouldn't be able to keep up. Not only that, this is an absolute farce because this is destructive of the environment.
That's right.
Natural gas is far safer, far cleaner, far better for the environment than having these solar panels, which are based on rare earth minerals and actually have polluted plastic, and trying to dispose of them as they break constantly, and taking over animal habitats with these massive farms, solar farms. You don't think that harms the environment?
Right.
Put that in a landfill. Watch what happens. The landfill becomes a toxic landfill. We will have no end of the pollution, the leaching of these toxins into the environment with this nonsense. You got the windmills. If you're a bat or a bird, you don't like that, because they end up at the bottom of the windmill. And what happens to them is migratory birds and bats are slaughtered by these windmills. And not only that, animals can't get near them. And the revolutions that take place create a sound. And this is heard by animals, and they flee. So everywhere they put this. And what about whales, right?
Yeah.
Look at Dominion Energy putting these things in the ocean. Absolute disaster. All right, we're not going to do this. And it's uneconomic. You know, the only way you can get electricity to be affordable to a person is massive government subsidies from these things. The cost is vastly superior, vastly higher than it is for natural gas. But what we do need is modular nuclear energy. This is fascinating. Modular nuclear energy. So this is something, and I don't believe in a government-planned energy economy. We don't need that at all. We need to remove government regulations that are impairing the development of modular nuclear energy, and we also need to remove those regulations for natural gas and oil production. And we need to incentivize getting back into the business the jobbers that have left because they know Biden's going to keep his promise of destroying the entire natural gas or fossil fuel industry in 10 years from his election. So we get rid of the regulations that block natural gas oil production in the United States. We incentivize with tax incentives the jobbers to go back in and keep looking for it. We'll have natural gas and energy for 1,000 years. We'll become energy independent. We will export energy, and we will be wealthy again. We will have $2 a gallon gas again. We're going to have home heating oil that you can afford. We're going to have an economy that works. We're going to have inflation go down in the grocery store as a result of this. When we repeal the climate change agenda, we're also going to have grocery prices go down. We're going to see a reduction in the size and scope of government when we get back in there. When I'm in there, I'm going to introduce legislation to get rid of the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education. We're going to get rid of the Federal Trade Commission. We're going to get rid of agencies of the federal government that have been preying on the private sector and preventing economic growth and development. We're going to have a flat tax. We're going to build this economy. We're going to grow the GDP. We're going to have a flat tax that begins at $200,000 a year, and it's 10%. Straight up, no change, 10%. You first pay when you hit $200,000. Everybody else is going to be out of this total tax system, and we're going to see the biggest economic boom in the history of our country. Yes. We're going to get back to a free enterprise economy. We're going to get back to trusting in the individual as Ronald Reagan trusted in the individual. And we're going to get out of this whole collectivist nonsense, and we're not going to have that happen. We're going to save our schools. We're going to save our economy. We're going to save the United States of America. We're not going to have an open border. We're going to have a country that is a country that actually has borders. We are going to be the greatest nation on earth again. We are not going to accept second place. We are going to be first place. We're not going to say that the greatest days of America are behind us. We're going to say they're ahead of us. And we are going to ensure that because we are going to take serious George Washington's admonition to us. George Washington told us in his farewell address that it was up to us to keep the sacred fire of liberty burning in this country. It was up to us. Each new generation would have to do it. Ronald Reagan told us the same thing. He said freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. He said we did not inherit it in the bloodstream, but it has to be fought for and passed on to each new generation. Or one day we would have to say in our senior years what it was once like to be free in America. You know, Abraham Lincoln in 1838, when he was just 28 years old, the head of the Whig Party in Illinois, he said this in Springfield to the Lyceum, the Young Men's Lyceum, Young Men's Gym. He said, if destruction be our lot, we must be its author and finisher. As freemen, we will live for all time or die by suicide. That is exactly where we are. We are in the majority. We're not in the minority. We are in the majority. This country has been taken hostage by a radical minority. We are not going to let them take our freedoms away. We're not going to let them enslave our children. We're not going to let them destroy the last best hope for freedom on earth. We are going to rise, and we're going to do it incentivized to come together to save our country. We're going to campaign under a slogan that this is it. In Virginia, across Virginia, we are going to register over 13,000 people in Appalachia who have never voted before, but who share our values. We are going to raise the number of people who vote on the Republican side from 28 to 32% in an election. We're going to raise it by 6%, and we're going to overwhelm Nova's Democrats. We are going to rise as a majority and take back our country, and we are not going to sit down. We are not going to rest. We are not going to take a moment away from this objective until we attain it. Because in this battle, victory is not an option. It is a necessity. Thank you very much.
$3,000 given to illegals. Is that every month?
Hey, listen. When they come, let me tell you something. When you come in, you go into these human processing centers, okay? If you're seeking asylum, they all do. And every single one of them gets cash, either on a debit card from the federal government or an actual cash. And as I say, a family of 4 gets $3,000.
Yeah.
And that's every single family of 4. It's every single individual. Do you realize, I asked the CBP chief, I said, Manny is his name, I said, can you estimate for me how much taxpayers are paying for illegal aliens based on the first year they're here? And he said, it's easily $100,000 based on the welfare they get, the food stamps they get, the Medicaid that they get, the free transportation anywhere in the United States that they get, and in addition to the cash they're given, and also to the subsidized education that they get. We're talking about benefits that none of us in this room would ever be eligible for. They are giving them to the illegal aliens.
I've been stood down when I've repeated that information, and when I've looked things up online, I think it was Boebert was one that said that illegals were getting that amount of money, etc. And the article stood it down and said that that was false.
That's because they take a narrow view. So what they're looking at is solely what they're getting from Medicare, right? And that's not the whole benefit package by any means. So when you take a look at, I asked him, I said, what do you estimate, Manny, is the cost per person in the first year? And he said 100,000. Now recognize this, upwards of 65% of them remain on welfare after that. And there's no restriction. They can get welfare for the rest of their lives, apparently. And we're paying this bill. And it's not 25, 50 billion. We're talking about probably close to $1 trillion that we're paying. And certainly, if you take into account the loss of life caused by illegal immigration, because they're letting in sex traffickers, drug traffickers, MS-13, 18th Street gang members, terrorists, agents of foreign powers. We have more communist Chinese in our country. You realize that there were already 97,000 individuals here from communist China on a visa. Every single one of them, by the way, before they can even leave the country, have to agree to engage in espionage in the United States for the Ministry of State Secrets to authorize them to leave. That, in fact, is their law.
That's right.
And you have 97,000 here on a visa, and they're available to engage in espionage. And then we have probably over 100,000, maybe 200,000 that have poured across the border. And so what are they doing? If we're sensible about this, we realize the threat. It's a threat to our infrastructure. It's a threat to our whole society from advocacy of violence, from BLM, Antifa, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah. All of these groups are somehow getting funding from the communist Chinese, and they're also getting funding from George Soros through his various PACs. So George Soros has been kicked out of every country in the world, but he's the best buddy of Tim Kaine. And he's the best buddy of the Democrat Party. And guess who introduced the Democrat Party to George Soros? Guess who was the head of the Democratic National Committee and introduced him? Tim Kaine. This is you got a guy who said when they asked him, aren't you worried about the possibility that you'll get into the limelight of Hillary Clinton and take some of that light away from her when you run as vice president? He said, oh, no, I'm a very boring person. And indeed he is. But he's not boring in what he's doing, not at all. But he is a boring person. But when it comes to this country and what he's doing, he's ravaging this country. And he's doing it with a smile, and he's saying, I'm just a good old boy from Virginia. Well, you know what, good old boy from Virginia? You've abandoned every principle that this country was based upon, and you're now an enemy of this country.
That's right.
Any other questions? Sir, ma'am.
Yeah, I am from Vietnam, and 49 years ago, we lost Vietnam, okay? Vietnam became communist. I came here, I had to stay in the camp for 4 months in order to have, all the FBI checked out and everything. Then we stay in the camp. Normally we stay in the Air Force base or, Pendleton base, the military base. We're not allowed to come out to see what the grocery look like. 4 months later, in August 1975, that's the first time I got a glimpse of Kroger or Food Lion. And I have been here for 49 years. I have been working, freebies. We have no freebies, nothing. They did tell us that we're going to get you approved to work, and they have a law firm working with me, and they hired me. I couldn't speak one word of English. And for 49 years, I worked for 3 different law firms in the state of Virginia. And I'm still, at 70 years old, I'm still working. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the right way to do it. So anyway, I'm gonna shut up and let you talk to me individually, and also come over here and take a look at this artwork. Needless to say, we need your financial support. If you can help us with that, it would be fantastic. I'll let you ask your question. Go
What do you
ahead.
think the Democrat end game is with all this? They're destroying the country. What do you think that they think is going to come from it?
They want a globalist state. What they really want to see is they want to see the George Soros vision of the world come to be. Really, it's
Which
called.
is what?
So this is what it is. So it is communism, and what it is they want us to be basically in a. Remember when Rahm Emanuel said, that never let a crisis go to waste?
Right.
Well, they've graduated from that. And now they create crises so that they can panic the public. That's why you have no police protection. That's why they are for defunding the police, anti-incarceration prosecutors, and allowing the borders to be open, allowing all the drugs and sex trafficking and all that through, and the cartels to operate in this country with liberality, so that you're panicked into a state of dependency, where you beg the government for help. When you get to that state, they can take total power. They can take over private enterprise, either by heavily regulating it into oblivion or by taking it over, actually. And they can build this corporatist state where they're at the top. This is a power game. They end up, they don't understand the lesson of Stalin and Trotsky, that when you get up there, you're going to be executed, because there's going to be one man who's going to be all powerful, one woman who's going to rule, and they're going to be a dictator. And there's no room for a second. They don't understand that. Oh, they're caught up in this whole idea. They hate us. They call us the deplorables. They hate us. They don't want us to be free. They want us to work for them. They want us to be panicked into giving up our rights. And they know that that will enable the creation of a globalist government. That's why they favor the World Health Organization taking over the doctor-patient relationship. That's why they favor all of these measures, and that's why you never hear, not a single peep, not a one word about your loss of life, your loss of property, your loss of liberty. It doesn't matter to them. No matter what an illegal alien does in this country, they will not ever show any sympathy for the victim of those crimes. They never will. They don't care that they let, like they did in Virginia here in Northern Virginia, they let this Honduran who was a sex offender, that ICE wanted him held and incarcerated until ICE came in to deport him. And Fairfax County let him go. Why? Because Steve Descano is a Soros-backed prosecutor who doesn't believe in incarceration. He has not prosecuted a single sex trafficking case. He's been in there for over 4 years, not a single case. There have been many, many arrests, and all of those sex traffickers are still out there engaged in criminal activity. And they are using the schools. Fairfax County has admitted, the Fairfax County School Board has admitted that every one of the 30 high schools in Fairfax County has a sex trafficking problem. Some of the middle schools do, and some of the elementary schools do. I represent 2 families whose children were sex trafficked within the Fairfax County Public Schools. One was a 12-year-old girl in Rachel Carson Middle School, and she was trafficked by an illegal alien of her same age who was there in the school, allowed to be in school, and who was directly affiliated with the MS-13 gang. And that boy seduced this girl, and then the gang raped her in the janitor's closet in the school, and then they took her from school every day for 6 months and trafficked her through Northern Virginia and would bring her back before the end of the school day, and she'd get on a bus and go home. And they told that girl that if she breathed one word of this to her parents or her siblings, that they would kill them all. And in addition, she complained 32 times to administrators in the Fairfax County Public School System that she needed help. And they gave her no help. They had every reason in the world to understand what was going on, but because it's an illegal alien, they didn't want to take any action against the child. They didn't want to take any action to complain to police. They didn't want the superintendent of schools to have to report it to Mayoris. They wanted this to die and to be hidden. And then when she sued them, and the suit's ongoing right now, she just had closing arguments last week, they persecuted her rather than settle with her. They paid millions of dollars to the best law firm that they could find to prosecute her, to go after this girl, rather than settle with her and recognize their negligence and give money to her for the horror that was inflicted on this girl's life. And I mean, we're talking about the most unspeakable horror. And she will never get over that. And she has to have constant medical care as well as psychological care. And this is not one instance, ladies and gentlemen. This is a problem throughout Virginia. This is here in Virginia Beach. This is in Newport News.
I see it every day.
This is in Charlottesville. This is in all of the counties, Prince William, Loudoun, Fairfax. It's all over. And there is inadequate resources being put to this. What I will do is introduce legislation that will provide capital punishment for sex traffickers. on the federal level because it's interstate. And then in addition, I'm going to require every United States Attorney's Office to have a separate Assistant United States Attorney solely dedicated to prosecuting these cases. And I wrote a bill for Mayoris, which I supplied to him, which would give him direct jurisdiction. Believe it or not, he doesn't have jurisdiction to prosecute sex trafficking cases, only the Commonwealth's attorneys do. And the Soros-backed ones in Charlottesville and Alexandria, former one in Loudoun and the one in Fairfax, all of them won't prosecute these cases. And you know what? That's another thing we're going to do. We're going to get rid of them. And you know how we're going to do that? Because they took money from the Soros organization in exchange for their commitment to not enforce the law and to defund the police and to do all this agenda that they have. You know what? When you agree in advance to not enforce the law, and that's your legal obligation, you've just violated a federal law called the Hobbs Act, and we're going to go after them on that. And we're also going to go after them for violation of criminal RICO, because this network with George Soros is a criminal enterprise in this country.
Yes, it is.
So Jonathan, I applaud you for running. I mean, I would never run, and to take the arrows. But I spent many years in the Pentagon doing budgets, and we had to balance the budget. And I support everything you said, that you could bring legislation to spend money on this, But one of the problems we have with the Biden administration is they're printing off money like there's no, and we got a debt that we pay more than the budget for the Department of Defense right now, interest on the debt. So you have great ideas. How are you going to balance this budget for the things you want to do, or the things, for the things that need to be done, that we aren't printing more money just to do it, where we could say, whatever, because you have great ideas, but it takes money, and we don't have that money.
This is not, the only thing that would cause expenditure of money is to pay the vets and other people who were kicked out what they're
There's
doing.
money associated with every legislation that you
everything
brought
else
up.
I've talked about is actually cutting government spending, cutting government regulation. There's a bill I didn't mention, which I wrote for Ron Paul, and it's called the Congressional Responsibility and Accountability Act. And that legislation will prevent any agency of the government's proposed rule from having any legal force or effect unless passed into law by Congress. This will shrink the bureaucracy organically, reducing costs, reducing the burden on the private sector, reducing the tax on the private sector. All of these things I've talked about grow the private sector, increase revenues to the government, believe it or not, even with my tax system. It will increase the revenue, as Laffer showed us, actually happened with Reagan. But on cutting government spending, when I say you get rid of the climate change agenda, that's $1 trillion a year we're saving. And then in addition to that, when I say get rid of the Department of Education, get rid of the Department of Commerce, get rid of the Department of Energy, and get rid of the Federal Trade Commission, it's not only a reduction in regulation, which also expands the economy, it's also saving hundreds of billions of dollars over what would otherwise be massive federal spending. And so we're going to cut government spending substantially, and we're going to grow the economy, and that's how we're going to balance the budget. And in addition, we have a $34 trillion debt. It's actually closer now to 35. It's 34.5. It's over that now. 35 trillion. Within the next 7 years, it'll be 60 trillion unless we fundamentally change the direction of this country. So wherever we can reduce government activity on the federal level and devolve it to the states, such as my block grant proposal, that will save enormous amounts of money. Basically, taking apart DHS will save hundreds of billions of dollars a year. We have got to do this. You're absolutely right. This is a mortal threat to our country. Right now, the BRICS movement is on steroids. They are replacing the American dollar with the Chinese renminbi all over the world. And they are effectively achieving a change in the reserve currency of the world, replacing it with the Chinese instead of the American dollar. If we don't change that, interest rates are going to go through the roof. And this is going to affect every single one of our lives and our kids' lives, and it's going to impoverish us like you would not believe. And I wouldn't be surprised if we went into a real full-blown depression. So your point is a good one. We have got to get control of the budget. We haven't had a budget process, even though the Constitution requires it, since 1996. We've never had an annual budget review since 96. We've had continuing resolution after continuing resolution. We've had Republicans compromising with Democrats and agreeing to keep spending, even in the presence of this urgent need to dramatically cut spending. We're never decreasing the amount we're spending these days. We're always increasing it. So we have to cut back on it in every way we can. And that requires a reassessment of what our national interest is, and ensuring that we're not going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars putting it into a black hole in the Ukraine.
That's right.
We have to ensure that our interests are being met. And you know how you do that economically? And this is another way we're going to make money. We are going to get back to energy independence in this country. And it's going to reduce the cost of everything. But we're also going to export that energy to Europe, because we're going to replace Russia. Russia gets 98% of its revenue from Europe, selling oil and natural gas. We're going to have liquefied natural gas depots in Europe, getting American oil and gas to Europe, and we're going to replace the Russians. That will deplete their money to finance the war, which makes a lot more sense than endlessly giving money that's causing us to be bankrupted. We're instead going to make money. We're going to have higher tax revenues as a result, and we're going to replace the Russians in Europe, and we're going to deplete their resources to finance the Ukraine war. Now that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all told, this is how we do it. It's going to take a lot, and it's not going to be easy, but you know what? It's essential, and we will do it. And so when I was 16 years old, I worked for a thing called the Free Congress Foundation. Paul Weyrich ran that. I was an intern. And he sent me over to see a guy named Charles Z. Witt, who was then on the transition team for President Reagan. And he was in charge of coming up with the means by which they would secure public support for the Economic Recovery Tax Act, the largest tax reduction up to that point in American history. And that was, he had a Democrat Congress. And this is the method they used. They decided, we're not going to just introduce a bill and convince colleagues. That's nice, and you have to do it. But we're going to pass the bill based on popular input that's going to pressure the members and put them on the spot. So instead of doing this thing in Washington where they walk around, Republicans too, and say, oh, you know, I don't know what, it's the Democrats are replying. Forget that. Go to the American people. Campaign for the legislation. Tell them when it's up for a vote. Tell them which members are lined up against it. Tell them to go get those members. Stop this uniparty nonsense. Let's get back to fighting for our Constitution and our rights against this rapacious government. And we have to reduce it. Jefferson said that government was a parasite. He told us that we had to be wary of government because it could suck the life's blood out of the host and kill it. That's where we are.
Hey, one last thing.
Yeah.
Last thing. I went to an event, and Hung Kao got up there, and the question was asked to him, how come you haven't been around Virginia Beach? His answer was, I'm out of the state getting money. Parkinson's said the exact same thing. So my point is, we got these other candidates that you're running against that are getting money outside the state, outside cities like Virginia Beach, and the influence is there. I looked you up. You're not doing that. So I just wanted to put it out to this crowd. We got other people that are opposing you that are getting money out of the state. They don't have time to come down to events in Virginia Beach because they're getting money out of the state. So go for it, okay?
Sounds like a good plan.
Isn't there some kind of a law that everybody who's been voted on to be in our representing us, they all have to make a pledge to support the Constitution? Isn't that treasonous not to do it?
Yes, and in fact, it's called the Oath and Affirmation Clause. So she said, isn't there a legal requirement for every member of Congress to swear an oath to support the Constitution? And yes, it's in the Constitution itself.
Yeah.
It's called the Oath and Affirmation Clause. Now let me tell you something about this. We have people like AOC, Bernie Sanders, who are avowed socialists. They have pledged to support a socialist state. That is antithetical to the republic the Founding Fathers created. And when you are asked to swear an oath to support the Constitution, you are being asked to swear an oath to support a republic. And you are asked to support this constitutional republic. They cannot do that lawfully. So when they swear an oath to support the Constitution and they are a member of an organization, Democrat Socialists of America, that advocates the destruction of the Constitution and replacing it with a socialist state, they're not ineligible to be seated. And if we had the Constitution followed as the Founding Fathers intended, you could vote for them until you're blue in the face, but they could never be seated because it's a qualification to vote. And they shouldn't be voting.
So what can we do about it?
Well, we got to get someone with chutzpah who's going to be the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House, who will have enough guts to say this is what the Constitution requires, and no, you're not going to vote. And put it up. They'll have to put it up to a vote in the House and the Senate. But hopefully, those people would recognize this is a constitutional obligation and would fulfill it. Now, in the end, we're going to save our country if people of virtue rise. We're going to save our country if people of virtue understand that they have to vanquish evil, that they can't just sit there and condone it and do nothing and allow it to flourish. So the Founding Fathers understood this. They understood that we would not have a country under a constitution unless the people were virtuous, unless the people were educated, unless they understood what their rights were and wanted to protect them. And that's part of what Washington meant by the sacred fire of liberty having to rekindle with each new generation.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
We did very poorly in this one. And one of the key reasons was the abortion issue.
Right?
How are you going to convince the left? So that's what they're going to use against you.
Yeah.
How are you going to convince them that it's a state's right, so forth and so forth? That's one of the main factors against them.
Well, I'm a constitutionalist, and I believe in the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States includes no provision for federal jurisdiction over the issue of abortion. There's no provision. There's no delegated power on abortion. There's no constitutional right to abortion. And so the Founding Fathers intentionally left this to the states. They did. Of course, abortion has always been with humanity. Ever since there have been humans, there's been issues of abortion. They were thoroughly familiar with it. Also in the colonies, they treated it differently. And in the states, they did in the New Nation period. As a federal candidate, I honor the Constitution. I swear to uphold it. I just mentioned that you must swear to uphold the Constitution. The Supreme Court in Dobbs determined what the Constitution meant, and that time they got it right. There is no federal power. And so as a consequence, as a federal candidate, it's irrelevant. The federal, and here it is relevant to this extent, you must, if you honor the Constitution, you must vote against federal spending for Planned Parenthood. But you must also vote against Lindsey Graham's bill to ban abortion nationwide. Both of them are unconstitutional under Dobbs. So the truth of the matter is, it is a state issue, and it will be decided. And in this state, the people have apparently decided that they do want abortion. Well, much as I don't like that, they want abortion. So this is what I would do if I were in the States. You can't change the fact that you have a Democrat House and a Democrat Senate until the next election, but what you can do is you can start helping women, and I'll tell you how. We need to cut down the barriers, the regulatory barriers, to adoption. We've got people adopting people overseas all the time now because they can't do it inside the United States. Break down the state barriers to adoption, make it ubiquitous in every single clinic and hospital all throughout the state. Have a full emphasis on ensuring that women understand it's not a binary choice between abortion and taking care of a child their entire life. Adoption is a viable option, and they need to understand it is viable. We need to make it viable. And in addition, what we need to do is we need to start being honest with women and get rid of the political football of abortion. It needs to instead be this way. Women need fully informed consent. They need to understand that upwards of 65% of women who have an abortion will suffer psychological effects of that decision the rest of their lives. They will either suffer from deep regret and depression, or they will suffer from a degree of remorse that is so profound that it interferes with their functioning as severe depression does. And they also need to understand that abortion is not risk-free, that some individuals will be sterile as a result of an abortion, and some individuals will have difficulty having pregnancy in the future, even if not sterile. So, let's be honest with women. Let's give them fully informed consent. Let's get off this political football nonsense. Let's get the fear that is associated with this issue out of here. Let's abide by the Constitution on the federal level. And let's ensure on the state level that we start giving women their due, which is honesty and full information, and treat them well, and try to enable them to understand that adoption is a serious alternative by making it so. Yeah, you might guess that that was about abortion. Okay. Yep.
I wanted to ask you how you feel about the banning of TikTok. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know how to feel about that.
So the technology in and of itself is not bad. The use of the technology by the communist Chinese is very bad. What we need to do is to allow the technology to exist in America, but to force the divestiture of Chinese ownership, influence, and control over it. We do this with telecommunications all the time. You can't own a radio station if you're a foreign national in the United States. You can't own a television station, and so on. And that's been the way it has been since the 30s. The same type of approach needs to be applied to the new technology, no Chinese ownership, and that depends upon a recognition of the truth, which is China is not, as Joe Biden says, a competitor of the United States. China is an enemy of the United States, actively engaged in asymmetrical warfare against this country right now. And so we treat them as such, and we force the divestiture of farmlands, we force the divestiture of the telecommunications infrastructure and Huawei, get them out, and then we also force them to divest any ownership, operation, or control over either the technology or information derived from the technology. If we do that, the technology is not in and of itself evil. It is something that I recommend that people don't let their kids have access to until they're much older. But nonetheless, we have a society in which many millions of kids, hundreds of millions of kids, are addicted to this stuff. We need to look at that problem too.
Why would they start with TikTok and not start with other problems with China?
Pardon me?
Why would they start doing this with TikTok instead of doing farms and all the other problems?
Because they want to have, just as they had the deep state censor all information critical of the vaccines, just as they had them censor everything about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's influence peddling scam, which has netted them over $200 million and is an enormous example of treason by the chief executive of the United States. Just as that is true, the Democrat Party wants to control TikTok and control the content of it. And
the election.
yeah, just like the election. I'm sorry, there's one question over here, and I'll get right there. Yes?
I'm sold, and what I want to know is how I can help work in your campaign as well as have wise talking points when I go out. Because you told us a lot of fabulous information today, really great facts and figures. So I want to be able to walk out when I say, oh, we should vote for this guy. Also, let me give you this information. Do you have, where do we sign up and what do we do?
So you sign up your volunteer sheets here. So the question was, from the far right over here, the question was, how do I help your campaign? And we have a sheet here to sign up for volunteers, right here, and give us the information we need there. We will integrate you into it. You'll get our newsletter. You'll also be given information on how to help us and volunteer support. We need people to go out and spread the word. Every single person in this room should do me a favor, and they should communicate with everybody they know, 10 people at least, that they need to go out and vote for me in this election. We need to tell people that it's on May the 3rd, that's early voting, that it ends on June the 18th, and that they need to get out as soon as they possibly can and vote for me. Because look, if we convince enough people of my message, I'm convinced we will win. I am convinced of it. Because everywhere we go in this state, and I've done it for a year, I have yet to find an audience where the overwhelming majority doesn't agree with me. The overwhelming majority agrees. We just had 2 debates. There were statewide debates. We had one at the Family Foundation, which was also simulcast. And we won, I don't have it in front of me, but we won by 20 percentage points above the next person in the campaign. We just had one in Loudon, which was in Hunkow's backyard. And Cal was second, and I beat him by 25 percentage points. So when people see us and see this message and see the difference that we offer here, it's really has been no contest. We win. So you're telling 10 people about it. You're telling 10 people, giving them access to our website, telling them to take a look at us seriously, telling them why you support us is going to be indispensable to growing this. And when we do this all over the state, we'll increase our name recognition and we'll be better off. We're also going to do a number of things to do that. You're going to watch a major push in the next 90 days. And, oh yes, sorry, thank you. She just mentioned, we need money, right? We need money to do that too. So whatever you can spare today, we've got these envelopes. If you can give us some donations, that would be great. We've been very successful in raising money, so we have $838,000 that we've raised in the campaign, and we are assured to raise a lot more. But we right now in particular need that money to get the direct mail out, to get the name recognition out, and get the emails going, and get the text messages going. But it just seems to me, I mean, we have the momentum behind us, and we are winning. Now let's finish it. Let's get it done. Let's get it. Let's get me on the ballot against Tim Kaine. Because unlike every other candidate, I'm not just going to raise the flag and say I'm a nice guy. I am going to attack Tim Kaine relentlessly, and I think we've seen that. And that's the only way we win. That is the only way we win. Has to be a clear contrast. Yes, sir. I'll be right with you in a second.
You're one of the best candidates I've ever seen, ever.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The question I had is the Republican Party, are they gearing up with a big sheet to try to prevent the vote fraud? And you talked about it briefly prior to the delegates that voted. Is there a system or people in place? I know the Trump team's aware of it, but do we have a group of people to help counter that? Because there was a red wave in 20, except in every state that had a legal voting system. Like, Florida, they took Dane County and Miami because Sanders got it fixed. In Carolina, they had 500 attorneys scattered all over the state to watch the voting flow. If we don't do that, it's like Stalin said, it's not who votes, who counts it.
So what was said over here, so you can hear it, he's asking about election integrity. He's saying that how is it possible for us to be able to prevail unless we have some serious activity, and what is that activity going to be against voter fraud? You know, we have in this state a 45-day voting period. Why is that? Because cheating happens within 45 days a lot easier than it does in 1 day.
That's right.
And why do we have ballot harvesting in this state? Because that's one of the principal means by which the Democrats cheat. And why do we have such loose laws with regard to mail-in ballots? And that again is because the Democrats control and they want to be able to completely enable fraud. So what I've done is I've asked sheriffs in this state to deputize former military and former police to be actually election officers. They'll be deputy sheriffs, but they would be election officers, and let's put them where they do the ballot harvesting in the old folks' homes, convalescent centers in the state. Let's put them there. Let's also put them at the clerk's offices where they have the put in multiple ballots. They oftentimes now use a daisy chain where they'll come up with a bus with college students paid $100, $150 a piece from DC, and they bus them in, and they have a whole bunch of ballots that they've harvested through ballot harvesting and also through other means, which are probably illicit, and they get those ballots. And you know, the person who is the voter is supposed to put it in the box, right? So they know that if they stuff the boxes like in 2000 Mules, that's going to be a red flag because oftentimes there's video of it. So instead they use a daisy chain approach where each person puts in one, goes back, gets in the bus, gets another one, comes back around, and they go through. So you've got one person putting one thing in. And if a policeman were there, it would dissuade it, but not only that, it would enable him to make arrests. And he would say, hey, look, what are you doing? This is an operation of some sort. And he could arrest them based on probable cause. So I'm in favor of that. The Trump organization has its own means, and they are going to be using this because President Trump is not going to be robbed of an election a second time. He's dedicated to this, and this is a major effort underway. And so each each Republican committee also has an election integrity unit. And I urge those election integrity units to become active during the campaigns and during the voting process and monitor this very closely. And we need a lot more people to volunteer for those functions within their own party organization. But until the laws change, we are going to have fraud. And it's going to be an issue. But if we incentivize enough people to vote on the Republican side and individuals who are Democrats who are sane, then we are going to win the election, right? We're going to win because the numbers will be so great.
My comment question was, how are you going to get rid of the uniparty Republicans?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. This is why we need a constitutional conscience in the Senate of the United States. We need someone who's going to call them to task. Like, for example, we talked about the continuing resolutions. That violates the appropriations clause of the Constitution, which requires a budget process. And so when you have someone who is fighting for that and telling his own colleagues you're violating the Constitution and makes it public and rails against them, I mean, I'm not going to be, I love this country and I love the Constitution of the United States and I believe in our rights and I've fought my whole career for your rights. I am not going to abandon that mission. And when a Republican deviates from it, slap. And when a Democrat deviates from it, kick. But they're going to get it. That's because mules kick. But they're going to get it one way or the other. We have to save this country. So
you're going to be one of those.
I'm going to be the constitutional conscience in the United States Senate. I'm going to fight tooth and nail to protect our rights and ensure that the Constitution's limits on government power are honored. And I will be absolutely relentless. And when I get in there, I'm going to introduce legislation after legislation to peel back the abuses, to cut out of government those entities. I'm going to abolish the administrative courts in America. We're going to make the agencies go to Article 3 courts where your rights are protected. You may not realize this, but you do not have any rights protection in an administrative court. You don't have the right to confront your accuser. You don't have a right to a jury trial. You don't have a right to a presumption of innocence. You don't have a right to have discovery against the government. Even if the government is the accuser, you don't even have a right to settle charges. They can change the nature of the charges against you all the way up to the time of decision. You don't have a right to an independent review. The party that is accusing you in an administrative court is also the ultimate judge. It's the commission itself. You get processed in an administrative case and let's say you win. It goes up to the very party that ordered your prosecution, the commission, and they decide the ultimate outcome. This is not a just system. This is a system of tyranny. In fact, that's what James Madison called it in the Federalist Papers. He said when you combine any two of these three powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, in single hands, that's the very definition of tyranny. And that's what we have in this country. We have an administrative state that is tyrannical, that is violating our rights with impunity, and we have to have someone who deeply understands that to get rid of it. And this is the only way we're going to save ourselves from absolute abuse from
How
the
do you
state.
get rid of it? How do you get rid of that administrative state?
The Congressional Responsibility and Accountability Act, which does not allow them to create any rule unless passed into law by Congress. So now they make their own rules and they have the full force and effect of law. Under the bill that I wrote, they could not make any rule that would have full force and effect of law. They could merely propose it to Congress. And then when it comes to existing rules, they'll all be sunsetted under this bill within 3 years unless passed into law by Congress. This neuters the administrative state. Then, in an additional piece of legislation, I would eliminate the administrative courts and force them to go to independent Article 3 courts if they were going to go against you. This would reduce the number of cases that the administrative state brings against people substantially because they depend upon knowledge of the outcome and a thing called the Chevron doctrine, where the courts defer to the agency's judgment as to the law in any area of potential ambiguity, and they also defer to their judgment as to what the material facts are. And this kills your appeals every single time. I'm one of the few lawyers who's actually won appeals from the administrative state. Most lawyers go a whole career and they fight like the dickens and they never get anywhere. 99% track record of success with the government against us in every one of these cases. If you're accused, you're guilty and you lose. That's 99% of the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So, do you, so the Republican Party has now gotten on board with voting early, you know, what do you think about that? Because people think that if you vote early, now they know how many votes they need to beat, and they can fudge, you know, the paperwork to win.
So, now that it is the law in Virginia, we have to play by that game, and we have to exploit it to the full extent possible, or else we won't win these elections. Thank you very much. And, yeah, thank you. I'm gonna quit here, this is a sign. But, in an ideal world, if I had my druthers, we would not have any, period to vote except one day that would be a holiday. And we would not have mail-in ballots except in limited circumstances where you're either an invalid or you're in the military. And then we would have an identification code that would have to be matched with each ballot so that you would be assured that the person is who they say they are. And in addition, I'd have mandatory review of the voter rolls. So when anyone leaves the state, they are immediately expunged from the voter rolls, or if they die or whatever. And then the third thing is I would completely eliminate ballot harvesting, and I would completely eliminate mail-in ballots, as I said, except for the military overseas, and except for individuals who are incapable of going to the voting booth. And everybody else would have to go. You'd have to go in like we did in the old days. And I also think that we probably need to have paper ballots. And we need to have transparency in that, so that they need to be recorded, so that you can see and they can post online for you, individual access to show you what your vote was so you can verify it. And we've got to do that, because otherwise the corruption is so profound, we're not going to have a functioning democracy, democratic electorate. One thing, don't ever think America is a democracy. We're not. All these pundits in the media, they say democracy. We're not a democracy. The Founding Fathers hated democracy. They wanted it limited in the government. They made one branch in, the Congress to be democratic, not the Senate, the House of Representatives. That was by amendment. But they also intended us, of course, to be a constitutional republic. And only in a republic are your rights maximally protected. Because in a democracy based on popular passion, your rights can be overrun at any time, and they can deprive you of your rights. Also, only here, in the history of the world, is there a government created that recognizes that its very purpose is to protect your rights, and also that your rights come from God, not from government. And that is a critical distinction. That's why in Parliament in Canada, during COVID, they could take away the rights of their people based on an emergency resolution from the Parliament, giving the Prime Minister total power over the rights of the people. That could not happen in this country under existing law and precedent, and because the very fact that we are a nation that recognizes our rights to be unalienable and to come from God, not from government. And the Democrats don't recognize that. They act and they speak of our country being a democracy and of our rights coming from government, which is totally false, total misrepresentation, but with an intent in mind, which is to make us like a Canada, where someone like Joe Biden can tell you that you don't have any rights during an emergency.
And they did.
And they did. There you go. Oh, by the way, I represented, I represented Matt Strickland. I don't know if you guys know, from Fredericksburg. So, Governor, he owns Gormeltz, and Governor Northam, in his executive order number 72, I don't know if you know this or not, but Northam ruled that by edicts, not by any act of the legislature, that you could not leave your house between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. And he also ruled that in restaurants, they had to follow this ridiculous little set of rules, a whole series of them. Everybody had to wear masks unless they were eating. If you sat down, you could eat without a mask. If you stood up, you had to put the mask on. You couldn't eat while standing up. If you're at the bar, you could drink without a mask, but as soon as you stood up the bar, you have to put a mask on. You can't drink. And then, all these ridiculous rules are 6 feet apart, so you have to have everybody 6 feet apart, which is utterly absurd because the virus doesn't know 6 feet is its terminus. It jumps off of you and it goes 7 feet sometimes, or maybe 10 feet, or maybe 50 feet. And if it's in stagnant air, it stays there all day long and floats around. So Matt said, hey, look, I serve my country, and I'm not going to come back to a communist state. I'm not going to be in a nation where my freedom to be in the business is going to be taken from me, my economic liberty taken away. I'm not going to abide by this. So he didn't abide by it. He openly violated it for over a year. And they came and they took his public health license away, and then he got that back through litigation. And then they came and they took his liquor license. They were taking his liquor license away. And they came in with 25 state police. They shut his whole restaurant down. They took all the alcohol in the restaurant. They confiscated it. And then they told him that he would be prosecuted criminally. And so he was anticipating all this. He contacts me. He said, Jonathan, can you represent me in this? I said, yes. When I heard all the facts, I said, I'm going to do it for free because this is outrageous and I want to help you as much as I can. I don't want your financial ability to pay to be an issue here because I'm curious, you know. So I took on that case. Now, the sad thing was, the lawyer that he had before me actually waived his rights in the administrative proceeding. The judge said, are you actually waiving all your constitutional arguments? And the lawyer for him said yes, and I about fell off my seat when I read this in the transcripts. So I realized he really didn't have a case on appeal. So I said, look, Matt, we're going to petition Governor Youngkin. And I said, this is a long shot, but I think this is your best shot. And I'm going to find out if other agencies, in addition to the ABC board, are following Northam's order. Because, you know, when Youngkin came in, he terminated those orders. And not only that, even Northam revoked Executive Order number 72 himself. And yet here they were enforcing it and against Matt. So this is what I did. I petitioned the governor. I asked him to issue an executive order. He issued the executive order. He compelled every agency of the government to supply him with proof of whether they were still enforcing the prior regime's orders, and of every instance in which they revoked the license or imposed a penalty. And then he ordered his finance secretary to determine the economic impact and who was affected. And then he was planning on coming up with legislation to reverse it. All right, I took that and I went to the ABC board. And I said to them, okay, the governor has acted. Now, you're going to reverse everything you've done. And then I said, if you don't, I'm going to go after each board member because you have now given me cause for your removal. And I'll petition the governor to remove you because you are enforcing against a person a revoked order from a prior regime, and you have no authority to do that. So that's my cause under the statute for your removal. And lo and behold, they gave him back his license. They gave him back all the alcohol that was confiscated except that which was spoiled. I said, that's still not enough. Let's get the Commonwealth's attorney on the line. They agreed, they got the Commonwealth's attorney involved, and they dropped all charges against him. And that's how that ended. So, I mean, in the end, you know what's interesting? Two things work in this country and in this state. The power of persuasion and being an absolute bulldog. If you are relentless, you will win. If you're on the offense, you'll win. It's a question of how much you win. But you will win. If you're on the defense, you're going to lose. And I learned this from many years of litigation. I am never in a case where I'm not on offense. Even when my client is sued, I'm on offense because I'll have counterclaims and whatever. But you've got to be on the offense to win. And what we've seen in our last two elections where Kane has won is an individual who has been on the defense. A Republican candidate who has been a nice person and a smart person sometimes, but who has not done anything other than defense. We win with offense. We have to be relentless, and that's how we're going to win. And Trump is that way. And Biden hasn't seen anything until he's seen Trump 2. Trump 2. All right, well, I'm done. I don't know, I'm done. So I appreciate this very much. Thank you so much. I appreciate your support. Let's go out and win this one. If I were Reagan, I'd say win one for the Gipper. I'm not the Gipper. But win one for the FDA Dragon Slayer. That's what they call me. That's right. The FDA Dragon Slayer. So win one for the Dragon Slayer. Thank you so much.